They forced him out in the middle of winter, a Navy SEAL, his young son, and a loyal dog standing in the freezing white snow. They believed he knew nothing, that the hidden inheritance fund would remain buried beneath silence and ice. But inside a secret letter, his late wife had already foreseen the betrayal and left the truth waiting to be revealed. And the dog, it didn't bark, didn't panic. It simply lowered its nose to the ground and stood in front of the boy like a living wall against the cold. When power tries to suffocate justice, a father chooses silence over rage, protecting his child with honor. Tell me where you're watching from, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers, because every follow gives us the strength to tell even more powerful stories. And now, let's step into the story. The northern sun did not warm anything. It only illuminated. It spread over Northlake in a pale, merciless brightness, turning the frozen lake into a sheet of white metal and the pines into dark spears thrust toward a sky too clean to forgive anything. Snow did not fall here today. It lay still, polished by wind, glittering as if the world had decided to look beautiful instead of kind. Mason Kerr stood at the edge of that brightness. 6 feet tall, just over 1.83 meters, he carried himself the way men do when discipline has fused into bone. His build was lean, functional, not sculpted for mirrors but for endurance. No beard softened his face. Clean-shaven, the square line of his jaw was visible beneath wind-burnished skin. His cheekbones were defined, sharpened by cold, and by years that had carved without asking permission. His dark brown hair was cut in a military trim, slightly longer than regulation, just enough to hint at civilian life without ever quite arriving there. His eyes were gray-blue. They did not accuse. They did not plead. They simply observed. He wore the same clothing he had worn for years, because men like Mason did not collect costumes for different seasons of life. The olive-gray tactical combat shirt had faded at the wrists and shoulders, softened by time and weather. A muted red thermal layer showed faintly at the collar. His combat pants were earth-toned, worn at the knees. Practical. Old military work boots anchored him into the frozen gravel. A scratched, utilitarian watch rested on his wrist, its face dull, dependable. Beside him stood his son. Noah Kerr, 9 years old, too quiet for his age. His brown hair fell in uneven strands across his forehead, as if it had grown without supervision since grief entered their house. And his eyes were lighter than Mason's, more gray than blue, and today they did not blink much. He stood close, not clinging, but orbiting. A child trying to be brave in a language he had not chosen to learn. And then there was Sable. The German Shepherd stood slightly ahead of them, sable-coated fur blending cream, gray, and black into a living gradient. She was nearly 5 years old, her build athletic and balanced, neither oversized nor bulky. Amber eyes tracked everything. Her black harness, trimmed subtly with deep red piping, fit snugly across her shoulders, the handle resting like a quiet promise. Sable did not bark. She studied. In front of them rose the Whitmore Estate, a Scandinavian-inspired glass structure overlooking the frozen lake. Clean lines, white stone, massive panes of reflective glass. It was a house designed to prove success, not shelter weakness. The gate was iron, modern, stark, and beside that gate stood Caldwell Ashford. Caldwell was a tall man in his late 60s, silver hair brushed neatly back, face narrow and drawn by a lifetime of careful control. His skin was pale, almost waxen in the winter light. He wore a charcoal wool coat, tailored, immaculate, and leather gloves that had never shoveled snow in their lives. His posture was erect, but not strong-rigid. The kind of rigidity that comes from believing the world should bend first. He did not step forward. He waited for Mason to approach. "Mason," Caldwell said evenly, voice thin but sharpened by authority. "This arrangement ends today." Noah's fingers curled slightly at his sides. Mason did not move closer. "Today?" Mason asked. The word was not confrontational. It was measured. Caldwell's gaze flickered briefly toward Noah, then returned to Mason. "It's about stability. The boy needs consistency." Mason almost smiled. Consistency. After a funeral 3 weeks ago. Behind Caldwell stood Greg Whitmore, a younger man in his mid-30s, Caldwell's nephew and financial advisor to the family trust. Greg was tall, but slightly stooped, as though permanently apologizing for occupying space. Sandy blonde hair, windblown. His face was softer, less resolved than Caldwell's. He avoided Mason's eyes. Greg had been close to Mason's wife, Eleanor, close enough to understand more than he let on. Mason's gaze moved to him for half a second. Greg swallowed. Sable's ears lifted. She had not been watching the men. She had been staring at something else. To the right of the gate, half buried in snow, stood a large stone unremarkable at first glance, weathered granite, but along its lower edge were faint scratch marks. Old. Sable walked toward it slowly, her nose lowered. She inhaled, and then she froze. Her body went completely still. Not tense, not aggressive, still in a way that meant calculation. A low vibration moved through her chest. Mason noticed. Noah noticed. Caldwell did not. Sable pressed her nose deeper into the snow at the base of the stone, and then lifted her head sharply and looked not at Mason, but at the glass house behind the gate. Her amber eyes held something unmistakable. Recognition, not of a person, of a place. As if the stone remembered. As if something had once passed through there, something important enough to leave scent embedded beneath winter and time. Mason felt it then, a subtle shift inside his ribcage. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. The same sensation before a door breach overseas, before the silence broke. "Leave it," Caldwell said, irritation flickering now. "Take your things." The word things struck harder than it should have. From inside the open garage, 2 estate workers were carrying boxes out. One stumbled slightly, and a small framed photograph slipped from a box and fell into the snow. The glass cracked. Noah flinched. Mason stepped forward and picked it up. Eleanor's face looked back at him, frozen mid-laugh, wind in her hair, lake behind her in summer blue. And the crack ran diagonally across her smile. He did not wipe the snow off immediately. He stared. His mind replayed the hospital room. The quiet. The way her hand had felt lighter than it should have. The way she had squeezed his once, only once before, slipping beyond his reach. "Mason," Caldwell pressed. "You know this is for the best." For the best. Mason's jaw tightened, but his voice did not rise. "You're not protecting him," Mason said quietly. "You're protecting control." Greg shifted visibly at that. Caldwell's lips thinned. "Eleanor wanted security for her son. And you think I don't?" For a brief second, Caldwell's eyes flashed, not with grief, but with offense. Noah stepped closer to Mason then. Not dramatic, just a half step. Sable returned from the stone and positioned herself slightly in front of Noah, not blocking, shielding. The northern sun glared off the glass facade, turning the estate into a mirror. Mason could see his own reflection small against the structure. and he gathered the remaining boxes without another word. Caldwell did not offer to help. Greg stepped forward once, hesitated, then bent to lift a box silently. His movements were efficient but restrained, as though afraid to disturb invisible lines. "Greg," Mason said quietly. Greg looked up. "If you know something," Mason continued, "now would be the time." Greg's throat worked. "I don't—" He stopped. His eyes flickered toward the stone, then toward the lake. "Just take care of him." That was not denial. It was warning disguised as sympathy. Mason filed it away. When everything was loaded into the truck, Mason closed the tailgate. The sound echoed too loudly in the cold air. Caldwell did not say goodbye to Noah. He simply nodded once. Noah did not nod back. Mason opened the passenger door. Noah climbed in. Sable jumped into the back seat, turning immediately to face the house through the rear window. When Mason got behind the wheel, the engine started with a low growl. For a moment, he did not shift into drive. He looked at the estate. He looked at Caldwell. Then he looked at the stone. Sable was standing in the back seat now, paws braced, eyes locked through the glass. Not on the house. On the stone. As if the chapter had not closed. As if something beneath that frozen ground was waiting. Mason shifted the truck into gear. The iron gate slid open with mechanical indifference. They rolled forward. In the rearview mirror, the estate grew smaller, swallowed by light. Caldwell turned away before the truck reached the end of the drive. Greg remained standing, and Sable did not sit down. She kept watching until the gate closed. Only then did she lower herself beside Noah. Noah leaned his head against the window. "Dad?" he asked softly. "Yeah." "Are we leaving forever?" Mason looked at the road ahead, white, endless, clean in the way only snow can be. "We're leaving for now," he said. Just the northern sun followed them as they drove down the winding road, bright and unsympathetic. Behind them, the stone stood unmoved. But the scent beneath it had not faded, and Sable knew. The road out of North Lake narrowed as it climbed. Pine trees thickened. The lake disappeared behind ridgelines of white. The northern sun followed them, but here it felt less like interrogation, and more like distance bright, clean, indifferent. Mason drove without music. Noah had fallen asleep halfway up the mountain road, his head tilted against the window, breath fogging the glass in small, uneven bursts. Mason watched him in the rearview mirror longer than necessary. Sleep came to children differently after funerals, too light, too quick, too fragile. Sable lay across the back seat, her sable coat blending into the truck's dark upholstery. Her amber eyes were open. She never truly slept in transit. Her black harness with deep red trim rested close against her shoulders, the handle slightly worn from use. When the truck slowed for turns, and she adjusted her balance instinctively, muscles shifting with silent precision, they reached the cabin near midday. It stood halfway up the slope of Sun Point Ridge, a modest structure of weathered wood and stone chimney, angled deliberately toward the southern exposure. Large windows faced down into the valley, where snowfields rolled like quiet waves toward the frozen lake below. The cabin was older than it looked. The wood carried sun-bleached streaks along its grain, and the porch boards had softened under years of seasonal freeze and thaw. It was not elegant. It was durable. Mason cut the engine. Silence followed, thick and bright. Noah stirred awake. "Are we here?" "Yeah." The boy stepped out carefully, boots sinking into powder that reached just above his ankles. He turned slowly, taking in the view. The air was colder here, sharper. It tasted clean. "This is ours?" he asked. "For now?" Mason didn't use words like forever anymore. Sable jumped down last. The moment her paws hit the snow, her posture shifted. She wasn't guarding. She was scanning. Her nose lowered immediately, inhaling deeply across the porch edge, the stone foundation, the lower siding. She circled the perimeter once without command, tail level, ears alert, but not raised in alarm. The cabin had a history. Dogs could smell time. The front door creaked open before Mason reached it. "About time you got here." Harold Quinn stood in the doorway. He was 73 and built like the old timber he worked with. Broad, slow, solid. His white beard was thick but trimmed short, covering a jaw that had once been powerful and now carried age with stubborn dignity. His skin was wind-browned and deeply lined, especially around his pale green eyes. Harold wore a flannel shirt beneath a canvas work jacket stained with varnish and sap. His hands were enormous, knuckles swollen from decades of carpentry. But he had built half the cabins on this ridge 30 years ago, including this one. Mason respected him without speaking it. "You kept the south windows clear?" Mason asked. Harold nodded. "Sun hits hardest from that angle. Warms the place natural. Your wife liked that." The words landed softly but firmly. Noah looked up at Mason. Mason swallowed once. "She came here?" Noah asked. Harold leaned on the doorframe. "A few times, didn't say much. Just stood out back and watched the ridge." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Sable approached Harold slowly. She didn't bark. She stepped close enough to inhale the scent of sawdust and old tobacco woven into his coat. After a moment, she relaxed slightly and stepped past him. Approval granted. Inside, the cabin smelled of dry wood, old books, and faint ash from a recently cleaned fireplace. The southern windows stretched wide, offering an uninterrupted view of the valley below. Even in winter, light filled the space generously. Noah moved toward the largest window and pressed his palm to the glass. "It's bright," he said. "It's supposed to be," Harold replied. "That's the point." Mason began unloading boxes methodically. His movements were efficient, but slower than usual. Each object he placed on the floor felt like admitting something permanent. Sable moved room to room, not pacing, reading. When she reached the porch again, she paused. Her attention fixed on the southernmost edge of the deck, the area where sunlight hit most directly. The wood there was slightly lighter, more weathered. She lowered her head, sniffed, and stayed. Mason noticed. Harold noticed too. "She's got good instincts," Harold said quietly. "She doesn't waste them," Mason replied. They worked in silence for a while. Harold left after ensuring the chimney draft was clear and the generator was functional. Before stepping out, he placed a rough hand on Mason's shoulder, a brief, firm pressure. "She knew what she was doing," he said. He didn't specify what. Then he walked back down the slope, boots crunching through snow with the steady rhythm of a man who had buried too many winters to fear another. The afternoon stretched long. Noah unpacked slowly, arranging small items along a shelf near the window. He placed the cracked photograph there without comment. Mason installed the portable heater in the far corner. Sable had not moved from the southern porch. As the light shifted lower in the sky, the sun intensified against the southern boards. Sable suddenly pressed her paw against a specific plank once, firmly. Then again. Not scratching. Pressing. Her ears angled back slightly, not in fear but in focus. She stepped back and looked at Mason. then at the board, then back at Mason. There was no sound beneath it, no visible damage, no scent of rot. Yet something about that square of wood held her attention completely. Mason stepped out onto the porch. He knelt, placed his palm against the board. It was warmer than the rest. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. He didn't pry it up. He didn't test it. He simply stood back up. "Later," he murmured. Sable watched him for another long second before settling near Noah's boots. The moment passed, but it did not disappear. Inside, Noah had begun drawing in a small notebook. When Mason glanced down, he saw the familiar shapes: mountains, trees, and a small figure standing at the edge of a ridge. "Who's that?" Mason asked. "Mom," Noah answered simply. The drawing was not sad. It was distant. Evening arrived quietly. The sky turned pale lavender, and the valley below reflected fading light like a memory trying not to vanish. Mason lit a fire in the stone hearth. The wood caught slowly, then steadily. Sable shifted position. Her body angled toward the western window now, not tense, alert. Mason noticed the change in her breathing first, slower, controlled. He stepped to the window. Across the valley, near the tree line bordering the lower access road, something dark interrupted the snow's uniform brightness. A vehicle. Parked. Not moving. Too far to distinguish clearly, but close enough to know it hadn't been there earlier. Mason's jaw tightened slightly. Noah joined him at the window. "Is someone down there?" "Probably." "Do they live here?" "Probably not." Sable gave a low exhale. Not a growl. Not yet. Mason didn't reach for his phone. He didn't reach for anything. He watched. The vehicle did not move. The sky darkened gradually, and with it the outline of the shape became harder to see. After several minutes, Mason stepped back. He drew the curtains halfway, not fully closed. He would not make it look like hiding. Dinner was simple canned soup, warmed over the stove, bread, water. Noah ate quietly. Do you think Grandpa's mad?" he asked without looking up. Mason considered the question carefully. "I think he's afraid of losing control. Is that the same as mad?" "Sometimes?" Noah nodded, as if that made sense. After dishes were washed, Mason stepped outside again, alone. The air had grown sharper. The valley below was nearly dark now. The vehicle was gone. He stood still for a long time. Snow reflected faint starlight. Pine branches swayed in slow, deliberate arcs. He felt the weight of the ridge behind him, the openness below. This cabin did not feel like exile. It felt like exposure. Sable joined him quietly, positioning herself slightly ahead and to his left, a habit from years of training and unspoken understanding. Her gaze remained outward. Mason exhaled slowly. "This is where we are," he said under his breath. Not to the ridge, not to the valley. To himself. When they went back inside, Noah was already curled beneath a blanket near the fire. Sable lay down at the threshold of the main room, half inside, half angled toward the door. Not guarding. Balancing. Mason sat in the chair nearest the southern window. The porch boards were invisible in the dark now, but he could still see where the light had struck them earlier, and he could still feel the faint warmth beneath his palm. He did not sleep quickly that night, but he did not feel defeated. The northern sun would return in the morning, and the southern boards would warm again. Whatever Sable had sensed, it was still there. Morning arrived sharp and colorless. The northern light did not rise gently. It appeared sudden, clean, exposing everything it touched. Frost clung to the inside edges of the southern windows, thin crystalline veins stretching outward like fractures in glass. Mason was already awake when the sun crested the ridge. He had slept in fragments. The cabin was silent, except for the soft rhythm of Noah's breathing from the couch near the hearth. Sable lay at the threshold again, head resting on her paws, amber eyes open. She had not moved much in the night, but when Mason stood, she rose immediately. Outside, the air cut deeper than the day before. Mason stepped onto the porch, boots pressing into snow hardened by the overnight freeze. The valley below glimmered under white light. He didn't look toward the tree line. He looked at the cabin, and he let himself feel it. This place wasn't refuge, it was exposure, but exposure had never frightened him. Ambush did. Behind him, the porch boards creaked softly as Sable joined him. She did not go to the far edge today. Instead, she stood closer to the center of the southern deck, head angled slightly downward. Noah's voice called from inside. "Dad?" Mason turned. And that was when it happened. The third board from the step gave way. It was subtle at first, a splintering crack beneath Noah's weight as he stepped out to join them. Sable lunged forward instinctively, her body colliding with the boy's legs, knocking him sideways onto the safer portion of the porch. The wood split fully an instant later. A square section of deck collapsed inward, revealing darkness beneath. Noah hit the boards hard, but intact. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Mason was kneeling beside his son, hands firm on his shoulders. "You okay?" Noah blinked rapidly. "Yeah." His voice shook, but not from pain. Sable stood between them and the hole, muscles tight, but not panicked. Her gaze was fixed downward. Mason helped Noah inside and instructed him to stay there. His voice was calm, controlled. It had to be. Then he returned to the opening. The space beneath the deck was shallow less than 2 feet deep. Gravel foundation, old support beams, and something else. A dull metallic cylinder, wedged between the joists. It wasn't buried randomly. It had been placed deliberately, shielded by the board above it. Mason crouched lower. The metal tube was about 18 inches long, capped at both ends, industrial grade. Weathered, but intact. A strip of faded electrical tape secured one end. He did not reach for it immediately. He scanned first. The area beneath showed no signs of recent disturbance. The gravel was compacted evenly. No fresh footprints. This had been here a long time. His pulse slowed, not from relief, but from recognition that this was not an accident. He reached in and pulled the tube free. It was heavier than expected. Inside the cabin, Noah watched from the couch. Knees pulled to his chest. His face had regained some color. "What is it?" Noah asked. "I don't know yet." But Mason did. Sable followed Mason inside and sat near the hearth, eyes tracking the cylinder. Mason set it on the table. His hands did not tremble as he peeled back the old tape and unscrewed the cap. Inside were 3 items: a folded letter, a small waterproof USB drive, and a rolled document secured with twine. He exhaled slowly. The paper was Eleanor's. He knew her handwriting, instantly angled but precise, as if each letter had been negotiated before ink met page. He did not sit. He stood at the table and unfolded it carefully. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Noah. That was the first word written. Then, if you're reading this, it means something has shifted the way I feared it would. Mason closed his eyes briefly. Her voice filled the room, not in sound, but in cadence. He could hear the pauses between her sentences. The way she had spoken when she was explaining something she wanted understood completely. She wrote about Sun Point Ridge, about the land's true valuation, about the energy rights beneath it, clean reserves that had quietly multiplied in worth over the last decade. She wrote that her father believed control meant security. She wrote that she believed trust meant protection. The rolled document was a legal copy of Land Rights Sun Point Field. The USB contained supporting records. And then the line that stilled Mason entirely. The trust activates fully if coercive guardianship is attempted. He lowered the letter. Noah stared at him. What does that mean? Mason looked at his son, not as a soldier calculating, but as a father choosing clarity. It means your mom knew someone might try to take you away. Noah swallowed. Grandpa? Mason did not answer directly. Sable shifted slightly, her ears angling toward the door, not because of sound, but because tension had entered the room. As Mason reread the final lines of the letter, Sable suddenly stepped away from the hearth and positioned herself beside Noah. She placed her muzzle gently on the boy's knee. Then she did something she rarely did. She looked at Mason not with alertness, not with caution, but with something closer to insistence. Her amber eyes held his steadily. Not about the board, not about the land, about Noah. Mason understood. This wasn't about property, it was about custody. He felt the shift internally, not fear, but alignment. He folded the letter slowly. He picked up the USB. There would be no reaction today. No confrontation. This required precision. Noah's voice broke the silence. Did Mom think you'd find it? Mason nodded once. Yes. The boy studied the letter from across the room. How did she know where we'd live? Mason glanced toward the southern windows. She knew where I go when I need to think. That was the truth. Eleanor had always understood that Mason retreated to elevation, to clean air, to southern exposure. She had chosen this place carefully. There was no panic in the cabin, only gravity. Mason secured the documents back into the tube and carried it upstairs, placing it in a locked trunk he kept beneath the bed. Not hidden, not obvious, deliberate. When he came back down, Sable had resumed her usual posture, alert but steady. Noah approached the porch again cautiously, peering at the hole. Can we fix it? He asked. Yes. Harold would replace the board easily. That part was simple. What lay beneath it was not. The afternoon passed in quiet focus. Mason measured the opening and covered it temporarily with plywood from the shed. His movements were efficient, but inwardly recalibrated. Sun Point Field. Energy rights. Coercive guardianship. Caldwell had moved quickly. Too quickly. While Mason replayed the moment at the estate in his mind, not the words, but the timing, the urgency, Greg's hesitation. This wasn't grief driving Caldwell, it was anticipation. Inside, Noah sat at the table with the cracked photograph. He had propped it upright despite the fracture. Dad, he said softly, are we safe here? Mason didn't lie. We're not in danger. That was different from safe. As evening approached, the ridge turned silver blue. Mason stepped outside one last time before dark. The hole in the porch was covered now. Snow glittered untouched around the cabin. He listened. Wind through pine. Distant crows. No engines. No footsteps. He felt something new settle into place inside him. Not anxiety. Purpose. Sable stood beside him, her breath visible in the cold air. "You were right," he murmured quietly. She flicked her ears once. Inside, Noah had fallen asleep again by the fire. Mason remained standing on the porch long after the light faded. The ridge had not changed, but the ground beneath it had, and so had the terms. The town courthouse in Northlake was smaller than memory suggested. It sat on Main Street between a hardware store and a diner with fogged windows. Brick facade faded from decades of winter sun. Snow had been shoveled into uneven ridges along the sidewalk. The sky overhead was a pale, relentless blue. Mason parked across the street. Noah stayed at the cabin with Harold for the afternoon. Mason had insisted. Some battles did not belong in a 9-year-old's field of vision. Sable sat upright in the passenger seat, watching the courthouse doors through the windshield. Her ears twitched at passing sounds car engines, boot steps, the metallic ring of a closing door. "You don't have to come in," Mason murmured. She did not respond. She simply held his gaze for half a second, and then shifted toward the door. He exhaled faintly. Inside, as the courthouse smelled like old paper and institutional cleaner, with a deeper undercurrent of brewed coffee drifting from somewhere unseen. Elliot Vance's office was on the second floor. Mason had researched him the night before. Federal land law specialist, 65, former litigation counsel in Denver before retreating north after his wife's death. Reputation, methodical, relentless, unhurried. The door was half open. "Come in," a voice called before Mason knocked. Elliot Vance stood from behind a desk layered with neatly stacked files. He was tall but slightly stooped, as though decades leaning over documents had reshaped his posture. His hair was iron gray, parted precisely. He wore a dark navy suit that had been tailored years ago and maintained with care rather than replaced. A short, trimmed beard framed his jaw more scholar than courtroom showman. His eyes were sharp brown, observant without warmth, but not unkind. "You brought the dog," Elliot noted, a gaze dropping briefly to Sable. "Yes." Elliot studied her for a moment longer than most men would. "Good." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Mason remained standing. Elliot did not insist. "Let's see it." Mason placed the waterproof USB drive and copies of the land rights document on the desk. He did not bring the original letter. Elliot slid on reading glasses and examined the documents with practiced efficiency. His fingers moved carefully, not reverently, but precisely. Sunpoint Field. Energy reserves. Conditional activation clause. The silence stretched. Sable circled once and positioned herself slightly behind Mason's right leg, angled toward the office door. Elliot's jaw tightened faintly as he finished scanning the paperwork. "Your wife anticipated coercion," he said evenly. "Yes." And she anticipated correctly. Mason felt the confirmation settle like cold iron in his chest. Elliot leaned back slowly. Sunpoint Ridge sits over one of the cleanest geothermal corridors in the state. The valuation has tripled in 8 years. Your father-in-law knows that. He wants custody. He wants control. Elliot removed his glasses. The clause here is airtight. If coercive guardianship is attempted, the trust transfers operational control to the surviving parent pending court verification. Mason's expression did not change, but internally something aligned with frightening clarity. Caldwell hadn't acted out of grief. He had calculated. There was a soft knock at the office door. A man stepped inside without waiting fully for invitation. Mid-40s. Tall. Broad shoulders under a heavy winter coat. Close-cropped sandy hair. His beard was uneven, trimmed without care. His eyes scanned the room in quick, assessing movements. "Sorry," the man said casually. Looking for property records. His tone was too casual. Elliot's gaze did not shift from Mason. They're downstairs, he replied. The man's eyes flicked to the desk, to the documents, or to Sable, and lingered. Sable did not bark. She did not growl. She rose slowly, stepping forward with controlled calm until she stood directly between Mason and the stranger. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were locked. Unblinking. The man's jaw flexed. For a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, his breathing changed. He stepped back first. Wrong floor, he muttered. He left. The door clicked shut. Silence followed. Elliot removed his glasses again, more deliberately this time. That, he said quietly, was not someone looking for property records. Mason didn't ask how he knew. Elliot leaned forward, voice lowering. Your father-in-law has already filed a preliminary guardianship inquiry. Mason's gaze sharpened. When? 2 days ago. Before the porch board collapsed. Before Mason even opened the tube. The timing wasn't coincidence. He's positioning you as unstable, Elliot continued, citing combat history, emotional volatility, risk to the child. Mason's hands remained still at his sides. He had been called worse in rooms much louder than this one. And? Mason asked. And he retained a psychological consultant to evaluate your parental fitness. Mason's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Who? Dr. Lionel Reeves. Elliot slid a file across the desk. Reeves was in his late 50s, balding with a fringe of gray hair, wire-rim glasses perched permanently at the edge of his nose. His photograph showed a narrow face, thin lips pressed together in habitual disapproval. His professional history included high-profile custody disputes, often aligning with financially powerful clients. He specializes in high-conflict guardianship cases, Elliot said evenly. He also consults for private firms that represent corporate landholders. The lines connected themselves. Sable had resumed her position near Mason's leg, but her ears remained angled toward the door. She knew, Mason said quietly, more to himself than to Elliot. Yes, Elliot replied. She did. Elliot stood and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. Snow drifted lightly now, fine and dry. Your next move must be measured, he said. You do not respond emotionally. You do not confront him directly. You allow the guardianship attempt to formalize. And then? And then we trigger the clause. Mason processed the strategy quickly. Let Caldwell overextend. Document coercion. Engage the court. Noah's face flashed in his mind. He imagined the boy sitting at the southern window, light filling the cabin. He imagined Caldwell's hand tightening around legal authority. This was no longer defensive. It was structural. A knock sounded again, softer this time. A woman entered, early 30s, dark hair pulled into a low ponytail, olive skin flushed from cold. She wore a heavy wool coat and carried a leather briefcase. Oh, this is Mara Klein, Elliot said. My associate. Mara offered a brief nod. Her eyes were intelligent, observant. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to detail work, rather than theatrics. She placed a folder on the desk. Sheriff Daniel Cole requested copies of the guardianship filing, she said. Mason recognized the name. Cole had stood neutral at the estate. What's his angle? Mason asked. Mara's mouth curved slightly. Hard to say. He's not known for bending easily. Elliot glanced at Mason. That's useful? Mason absorbed it. A sheriff who did not bend. A consultant who did. A father-in-law who anticipated resistance. The field was forming. Outside, snow thickened, softening the edges of buildings. Mason gathered the copies of the documents. File whatever is necessary, he said. Elliot nodded once. I will. As Mason turned toward the door, Elliot added quietly, You're not fighting for land. I know. You're fighting for narrative. Mason paused. That word lingered. Narrative. Caldwell would frame him as volatile, as unpredictable, as unfit. Mason did not need to prove strength. He needed to prove steadiness. When he stepped back into the cold, the air felt sharper than before. Sable descended the courthouse steps ahead of him, scanning both directions along the street. No vehicles lingered. No faces watched openly. But Mason did not mistake absence for safety. He opened the truck door and glanced back once at the courthouse. Snow continued to fall in quiet, steady flakes. He did not feel anger. He felt alignment. The rules had clarified. And clarity, to a man like Mason Kerr, was power. The cold sharpened after the courthouse meeting. Not in temperature, Northlake had already committed to winter, but in texture. The air felt thinner, more brittle, as if it could fracture under the wrong movement. Mason noticed it first in the silence. The cabin no longer felt simply exposed. It felt observed. Noah had returned to school 2 days after Mason's visit to Elliot Vance. The drive down the ridge each morning was quiet. Snowbanks rose along the narrow road, pine branches bending heavy under white weight. Mason watched the rearview mirror often, though nothing followed. Nothing obvious. Sable rode upright in the back seat, posture composed. Her amber eyes moved constantly, not restless, but cataloging. The black harness with deep red trim remained snug across her shoulders. She leaned forward slightly whenever the truck slowed near intersections. She wasn't nervous. She was calculating. By the third evening after the courthouse, the generator sputtered once before stabilizing. Mason heard it from the kitchen. A mechanical cough. Then a brief flicker in the lights. He stepped outside immediately. The wind was steady, but not severe. No snowstorm. No fallen branches. He walked around the side of the cabin toward the generator housing. Sable followed. Silent. The generator panel hung slightly ajar. Mason crouched. The latch had been loosened, not broken. Not damaged, simply turned. Inside, the fuel line had been twisted just enough to restrict flow. Not enough to shut it down entirely. Enough to create instability. Mason's jaw tightened. This wasn't vandalism. It was calibration. He straightened slowly. No footprints were obvious in the snow. The ground had hardened under 2 days of sun and frost, preserving little. He walked the perimeter anyway. Nothing. Inside, Noah was finishing homework at the table near the southern window. Power flickered, Noah said casually, as if reporting weather. I saw. Is it bad? No. Mason kept his voice level. That night he didn't sleep at all. He sat in the chair nearest the door, boots still on, listening. The ridge exhaled wind through pine needles. The wood stove crackled softly. Noah slept. Sable lay near the threshold again, but she did not rest her head fully. Her ears moved frequently. Morning brought a pale sky and a fragile calm. Mason repaired the fuel line fully and installed a secondary lock on the generator housing. He did not call Elliot. He did not call anyone. Not yet. Later that afternoon, water pressure weakened. At first it was subtle, the kitchen faucet sputtering faintly before returning to steady flow. Mason tested the bathroom sink. Same. He stepped outside toward the waterline access point near the rear foundation. The pipe insulation had been sliced cleanly, not torn by animals, not cracked by freeze. Cut. As Mason knelt beside the severed insulation, Sable suddenly bolted toward the back slope of the ridge. No warning bark, No growl. Just a sudden, explosive movement. Mason rose instantly, instinct overriding thought. Sable ran 20 yards down toward the tree line and stopped abruptly. Body rigid, eyes fixed, Mason reached her side seconds later. There, half concealed behind a snow-caked rock, was a small device mounted low against the trunk of a pine. Black. Matte. No larger than a deck of cards. A camera. Battery-powered. Facing the cabin. Not angled randomly. Positioned precisely toward the porch and main windows. Mason didn't touch it. He crouched and studied it carefully. New. Installed recently. This was not harassment. This was documentation. He felt something colder than anger settle inside him. Not fear. Recognition. He stepped back slowly. Sable remained staring at the device, muscles taut but controlled. Mason took out his phone and photographed the setup from multiple angles before returning to the cabin. He left the camera in place. He would not disrupt the evidence. Inside, Noah was standing by the door now. "Dad?" Mason crouched to eye level. "Someone's trying to see if we're okay up here." Noah frowned. "Like a neighbor?" Something like that. It wasn't a lie. It simply wasn't the whole truth. That evening, Mason drove into town. He parked outside the sheriff's office, a low brick building with a single American flag stiff in the winter wind. Sheriff Daniel Cole opened the door before Mason reached it. Cole was mid-40s, broad-shouldered but not bulky. His dark hair was flecked with early gray at the temples. Clean-shaven, square-jawed, his expression carried the weary steadiness of someone who had spent decades mediating conflicts between neighbors who would never admit fault. His uniform was pressed but not immaculate. Practical boots, no theatricality. "I figured you'd come," Cole said. You did?" "Northlake isn't big enough for secrets." Inside, the office smelled faintly of paper and leather. Mason described the generator and water line. Cole listened without interruption. When Mason mentioned the camera, Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. "You touch it?" "No." "Good." Cole leaned back in his chair. "You have enemies?" he asked plainly. "Depends who's asking." Cole almost smiled. "I'm asking." Mason considered. "My father-in-law filed for guardianship." Cole nodded once. "I saw the paperwork." "Thoughts?" Cole exhaled slowly. "I don't like outside consultants stirring custody disputes. I don't like cameras in trees either." He stood. "Let's go take a look." The ride back up the ridge was silent. Cole drove his own truck, Mason following behind. At the tree line, Cole crouched beside the device. He didn't remove it immediately. He studied the mount, the screws, the angle. "Not amateur," he murmured. And he stood and scanned the surrounding area. "You understand what this looks like," Cole said quietly. "Yes." "Looks like someone's trying to document instability." Mason didn't react visibly. Cole removed the device carefully, placing it in an evidence bag from his truck. "I'll file it as unlawful surveillance," he said. "But unless we trace ownership, it won't stick." "That's fine." Cole studied Mason's face for a long moment. "You planning to escalate?" "No." "Good." Cole nodded once more and left. Back inside, Noah had been watching from the southern window. "Was it bad?" he asked. "No. Are we in trouble?" Mason stepped inside and closed the door firmly. "No." He placed a steady hand on Noah's shoulder. "We're just being watched." The boy processed that. "Like on TV?" "Like people who want to make sure they're right." Noah glanced toward Sable. "She'll know if they come close, right?" Yes. That, at least, was true. Night settled heavy. The power held steady, as the water line was temporarily sealed. Mason sat again in the same chair by the door. He replayed Elliot's words. Narrative. This was not about breaking things. It was about creating a record. If Mason reacted with aggression, if he tore the camera down violently, if he confronted Caldwell publicly, it would feed the script already written for him. Unstable, unfit. He closed his eyes briefly. Images surfaced uninvited. Dust in desert air. Gunfire. A friend's hand slipping from his grip. He opened his eyes immediately. Not now. Sable shifted closer, pressing lightly against his leg. Grounding. Noah stirred in his sleep by the fire. Mason stood and walked to the southern window. The valley below shimmered faintly under moonlight. The frozen lake stretched silent and unbroken. Somewhere out there, someone believed they were in control. Mason didn't need control. He needed patience. Behind him, Sable returned to her place near the threshold. Half inside, half angled toward the door. Not guarding. As balancing. The cabin remained intact. The ridge remained steady. The surveillance had been seen, and now documented. The courthouse looked different when you were walking in to defend your child. It was the same brick, the same narrow windows, the same thin American flag moving stiffly in the winter wind. But the air around it felt charged now, like a place where decisions settled into bone. Mason stepped out of the truck slowly. He wore the same olive-gray tactical shirt beneath a dark winter jacket, the red thermal collar visible at his throat. The shirt had faded at the wrists from years of use. The fabric moved with him without resistance. His boots were scuffed, but solid. His military watch sat low on his wrist, face dulled from weather. He had shaved that morning carefully. No deviation from discipline. Noah walked beside him, gloved hand tucked into Mason's coat pocket. The boy's face was pale, but steady. What his brown hair had been combed with deliberate care. He looked smaller in the winter light, but not fragile. Sable walked slightly ahead. Black harness secure, red trim barely visible beneath the coat of sable fur. Her posture was alert, but not defensive. She moved like a quiet current, aware of everything. Inside, the hallway buzzed faintly with low voices and the scrape of shoes on tile. Caldwell Ashford stood near the courtroom doors. He wore a charcoal overcoat again, perfectly tailored, his silver hair combed back without flaw. His face remained narrow and composed, but something beneath his stillness felt sharper. Today calculated patience. He rested one gloved hand over the handle of his cane, though Mason had never seen him use it for support. Beside him stood Dr. Lionel Reeves. Reeves was thinner than his photograph suggested. His suit hung slightly loose on his narrow frame, as if he inhabited it rather than wore it. His wire-rim glasses caught the light with a sterile glint. He had a habit of pressing his lips together before speaking, a gesture that implied careful evaluation. His eyes assessed Mason clinically, not hostile, not friendly, simply appraising. Across the hallway, Elliot Vance stood with Mara Klein. Elliot's navy suit looked precisely the same as before. His beard had been trimmed again, lines sharp. He held a slim leather briefcase in one hand. His posture was calm, but there was steel in the way he planted his feet. Mara stood slightly behind him, dark hair pulled back, eyes scanning faces as if mapping alliances in real time. Sheriff Daniel Cole leaned against the far wall, arms crossed loosely over his chest. His uniform was crisp but practical, expression neutral. The bailiff called them in. The courtroom was modest wood-paneled walls, a raised bench beneath the state seal. Sunlight filtered through high windows, pale and unforgiving. Judge Eleanor Hart presided. She was in her late 50s, African-American, tall even while seated, with short natural hair flecked with gray. Her face held deep-set lines not of anger, but of long patience. She wore no visible jewelry beyond a simple wedding band. Her reputation in Northlake was clear. She did not entertain theatrics. Mason took his seat. Noah sat beside him. Sable lay quietly at his feet, chin resting on paws. The hearing began without ceremony. Caldwell's attorney, an external firm representative named Richard Halpern, stood first. Halpern was tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with slicked-back dark hair and a voice that projected easily. He spoke smoothly, outlining concerns about Mason's combat background, emotional volatility, and recent destabilizing events at the cabin. He referenced power instability, water damage, environmental unpredictability. Mason did not react. He watched Noah's hands instead, how they rested calmly on his lap. Then Dr. Reeves took the stand, and Reeves adjusted his glasses and described his preliminary psychological impressions. He spoke in clinical phrases: hypervigilance, potential reactive aggression, unresolved trauma markers. He had not conducted a full evaluation. He did not need to. He was building a framework. When Reeves described Mason as prone to destabilization under perceived threat, Sable lifted her head. She did not move toward the stand. She did not bark. She simply stood up. Calmly. Her posture changed from resting to alert, measured. Steady. Her amber eyes fixed not on Reeves, but on Caldwell. The room stilled. Judge Hart's gaze shifted briefly to the dog, then back to Reeves. Mason felt something shift inside him. Not anger. Recognition. Reeves's description had been theoretical. Sable's stance was factual. Mason reached down and rested a hand lightly on her harness. She lowered herself again immediately. No disruption. No aggression. The moment passed, but it lingered in the room like a scent. Elliot rose next. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. He presented documentation of the unlawful surveillance device recovered from Sunpoint Ridge, photographs, time-stamped reports from Sheriff Cole, evidence of generator tampering and waterline sabotage. Halpern objected lightly. Judge Hart overruled. Elliot then introduced the trust clause. He did not dramatize it. He read it plainly. Operational control transfers to the surviving parent upon documented attempt of coercive guardianship. Judge Hart's eyes sharpened slightly. Caldwell's composure did not crack, but his fingers tightened faintly around the cane. Elliot called Sheriff Cole. Cole stepped forward, oath taken, voice steady. He described the camera's placement, the cut insulation, the fuel line adjustment. He did not speculate. He did not accuse directly. He simply stated facts. When asked whether Mason had reacted aggressively during discovery, Cole answered evenly. No. Halpern attempted to redirect toward Mason's military history. Judge Hart leaned forward slightly. Combat service is not evidence of parental instability, she said sharply. Proceed carefully. Halpern adjusted course. Finally, Elliot turned toward Mason. Mr. Kerr, he said quietly, why do you wish to retain custody of your son? The question hung heavier than any legal clause. Mason stood. He did not look at Caldwell. He did not look at Reeves. He looked at the judge. I don't wish to retain custody, he said evenly. I wish to remain his father. Silence. I'm not asking for land, he continued, or control. I'm asking to continue raising my son in a place his mother chose because she trusted me. His voice did not waver. He did not reference surveillance. He did not accuse. He did not perform. He simply stood. Judge Hart studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Caldwell. "Mr. Ashford," she said evenly, "this court does not find sufficient evidence to justify emergency guardianship, whilst the petition is denied pending further review." A small exhale rippled through the room. Judge Hart continued. "Additionally, this court is formally requesting an investigation into potential coercive interference connected to this filing." Caldwell's face remained composed, but the rigidity in his shoulders tightened visibly. Reeves lowered his gaze. Halpern gathered his papers quickly. Elliot did not smile. He simply sat back down. Mason exhaled, once slow, controlled. Noah looked up at him. "Is that it?" the boy whispered. "For now," Mason replied. Outside, the winter sun blazed across the courthouse steps. Caldwell exited without speaking to Mason. Greg Whitmore, who had appeared quietly in the back of the courtroom during proceedings, hesitated near the door. He offered Mason a brief nod. Not apology, not allegiance. Acknowledgement. Sable walked beside Mason and Noah down the steps. Her posture was not triumphant. It was steady. Mason did not feel victory. He felt shift. The narrative had cracked. And beneath the white northern sun, clarity felt like oxygen. Spring did not arrive all at once on Sun Point Ridge. It seeped in. Snow thinned along the southern slope first, revealing dark soil beneath. Pine needles re-emerged in damp clusters. The frozen lake below loosened its hold gradually, ice breaking into drifting plates that caught sunlight like shattered mirrors. 6 months had passed since the courthouse. The cabin no longer felt temporary. It felt intentional. Mason stood on the ridge overlooking a cleared stretch of land just east of the cabin. The space had once been overgrown with brush and deadfall. Now it was level, marked with wooden stakes and fresh-cut beams. Sun Point Haven. The sign lay flat on sawhorses nearby, the letters carved into cedar by Harold Quinn's steady hands. The wood was warm honey in color, sealed against weather but left natural. Beneath the name was a smaller line: Veterans, Service Dogs, Second Starts. Harold stood beside the sign now, wiping sawdust from his palms. Age had not reduced his strength, only slowed its delivery. His thick white beard caught bits of cedar dust. His pale green eyes surveyed the construction with quiet approval. "Never thought I'd build something like this up here," he said. "You built the cabin," Mason replied. Harold shrugged. "Cabin's shelter. This," he gestured outward. "This changes." Mason didn't respond immediately. The land had officially transferred under the trust clause 3 months earlier. The legal battle had quieted. Caldwell had not appealed. He had retreated. But retreat did not erase history. Across the clearing, a young man adjusted fencing posts around a small training yard. His name was Aaron Delgado, 27, former Army infantry. Lean build, dark-cropped hair, sleeves rolled up to reveal faint scars along his forearms. But his movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as if sudden gestures might awaken something inside him. Aaron had arrived 2 months ago. He spoke little at first. Now he spoke slightly more. He worked steadily. Beside him trotted a young Belgian Malinois named Rook, 2 years old, alert and restless. Rook's coat was a sharp blend of tan and black, his energy coiled tightly under disciplined commands. Unlike Sable's grounded presence, Rook vibrated with potential still learning balance. Noah ran through the open grass patch beyond the fencing, laughing as he tried to keep up with Sable. She moved easily now, without the constant tension of winter. Her sable coat shone richer under warmer light. The black harness with red trim remained part of her, though Mason sometimes removed it during free play. Today she wore it. She liked routine. Noah had grown taller in 6 months. Not dramatically, but enough that his sleeves no longer hung loose. His grief had softened, not disappeared, but integrated. But he carried it differently now. He had chosen the name for the center, Sunpoint Haven. Because it's where the sun hits first, he had said. And because, Mason knew, Eleanor had loved that southern exposure. Inside the partially completed training hall, Mira Lawson stood reviewing paperwork at a folding table. She had begun volunteering weekly once the legal dust settled. Early 30s, olive-toned skin, dark brown hair typically pulled back in a low knot, practical in demeanor, but warm in instinct. Her voice carried easily, but never sharply. "You're going to need another liability waiver draft," she called out toward Mason. "2 more veterans inquiring this week?" Mason nodded. Growth felt strange. Earned, but strange. He walked toward the edge of the property where the ground dipped slightly toward the original porch line of the cabin. The repaired boards blended seamlessly now. Nothing visually marked what had once been hidden beneath. Sable, mid-chase with Noah, had slowed abruptly. Her head turned not toward the woods, not toward the ridge, but toward the far end of the property near the gravel road. A single vehicle had stopped at the perimeter. Not aggressively, not concealed, parked openly. Mason followed her gaze. Caldwell Ashford stepped out. He looked older than he had 6 months earlier. The charcoal coat remained, but it hung slightly looser on his frame. His posture was still rigid, but less commanding, more brittle. The cane in his hand was no longer decorative. He leaned on it now. He did not approach immediately. He stood by the road, watching. Noah noticed him next. He stopped running. Silence settled over the clearing. Harold set down his tool. Aaron straightened, but did not step forward. Mason walked toward the road slowly. He did not hurry. Caldwell met him halfway. Up close, the older man's face showed new lines, deeper around the eyes. Not from laughter, from strain. "I won't stay long," Caldwell said, but his voice lacked its former edge. Mason waited. "I requested visitation through the court," Caldwell continued. "Supervised." "I saw." Caldwell glanced briefly toward Noah, who stood beside Sable now. "He looks well." "He is?" Silence again. Caldwell shifted his weight slightly on the cane. "I miscalculated," he said quietly. The admission did not feel theatrical. It felt extracted. Mason studied him. Not forgiving, not condemning, just observing. "You thought control was protection," Mason said. Caldwell's jaw tightened faintly. "I built everything I have by controlling variables. And lost what mattered." Caldwell did not answer. Noah walked forward slowly. He stopped several feet away. "Hi, Grandpa." Caldwell's expression shifted subtly, not softening entirely, but losing its rigidity. "Hello, Noah." The supervised meeting was brief, awkward, measured. Caldwell did not attempt to touch him. He simply spoke, asking about school, about the ridge. Noah answered politely. "我先说." When Caldwell finally turned to leave, he paused once more. "Eleanor would have approved," he said quietly. Mason did not respond. The car drove away. Silence lingered only a moment before the ridge resumed its normal rhythm. Sable exhaled softly. Later that afternoon, as workers packed tools away and Aaron secured Rook in his crate, Sable wandered toward the edge of the original porch foundation again. The ground there had thawed unevenly. She began digging. Not frantically, not aggressively, purposefully. Noah watched first. "Dad." Mason approached slowly. Sable unearthed something small. Metal glinted beneath dirt. Mason knelt. He brushed soil away gently. A pendant. Silver. Oval-shaped. Scratched from wear. He recognized it instantly. Eleanor had worn it nearly every day, a simple piece engraved inside with a single word. Trust. He had thought it lost during the move from the estate. Sable stepped back once he lifted it, her gaze steady, not triumphant, complete. While Mason stood slowly. The ridge felt different in that moment, not lighter, not heavier aligned. He slipped the pendant onto the chain of his old military dog tags. Metal against metal, a sound that carried weight. Noah reached out and touched it lightly. Mom's, he said. Yes. The sun lowered gradually toward the western line of trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. Aaron and Harold left for the evening. Mira gathered her papers and waved from the porch. The sign for Sun Point Haven was raised into place just before dusk. Mason, Noah, and Sable stood together watching it settle. 3 shadows stretched across the ground, one tall and straight, one smaller but steady, one low and balanced between them. The ridge no longer felt like exposure. It felt chosen. Not survival. Construction. Not defense. Direction. Sable leaned gently against Mason's leg. He rested his hand on her harness. Noah slipped his hand into Mason's other palm. Below them, the lake reflected gold. The sun did what it had always done here. It struck first at the southern boards, and then it held. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly. They come in the form of a loyal dog who refuses to look away, a child who keeps believing, a father who chooses patience over anger, a piece of land that holds truth until the right moment. Maybe that's how God works most of the time, not by changing the storm, but by strengthening the ones standing inside it. In our daily lives, we may not face courtrooms or hidden cameras in the woods, but we face fear, we face loss, we face moments when we are misunderstood, watched, judged, or tested. And in those moments, faith is not about asking God to remove the mountain. It is about trusting that He placed something steady inside you long before the climb began. Sun Point wasn't just land, it was alignment. It was trust buried beneath pressure, as it was proof that what is meant for you cannot be stolen when you stand in truth. Maybe you are in your own winter right now. Maybe someone is trying to rewrite your story. Maybe you are tired. Remember this: God sees what is hidden. God strengthens what is tested. And sometimes the quietest loyalty around you is the very miracle you prayed for. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing stories that remind us who we are when the world grows cold. May God bless you, protect your home, guard your children, and give you steady ground beneath your feet. And may you never underestimate the quiet miracles walking beside you.